A life consists of two completely separate realities running parallel to each other, existing in different dimensions of the same world. Some people choose to manage these realities deliberately, with precision and calculated care. Others are condemned to live with this duality every single moment of their existence, unable to escape, unable to merge the two worlds, unable to find peace. Eleanor Davis lived one of these fractured lives, but unlike most people who might stumble into such circumstances, Eleanor had chosen this path. She had volunteered for it. She had accepted it with eyes wide open, understanding fully the psychological cost that such an existence would demand. On the north side of Boston, in a nondescript office building on Hanover Street, Eleanor Davis worked as a cleaning staff member. Every weekday morning, at exactly 5:30 a.m., she would arrive at the service entrance of the building. She would clock in, change into her gray work uniform, and begin her 9-hour shift. No one spoke to her. No one acknowledged her presence beyond a cursory nod or brief greeting. This was exactly as Eleanor wanted it. Invisibility was not a curse to her, it was a superpower. The office building itself was unremarkable. 10 stories, glass and steel facade, the kind of structure you could find in any major American city. Inside, approximately 200 employees worked in a variety of departments: finance, human resources, legal services, executive offices. Eleanor cleaned all of it. She emptied trash cans, wiped down desks, mopped floors, scrubbed bathrooms, and dusted surfaces. Her work was meticulous, professional, and utterly unremarkable. By the standards of her co-workers, the office workers, the managers, the executives, Eleanor was invisible. She was furniture with a pulse, a necessary function of the building's operations, but not someone to be remembered, not someone to be considered, not someone whose thoughts or opinions or feelings mattered in any meaningful way. This invisibility had taken her nearly 15 years to perfect. But Eleanor's life was not limited to this office building. The office building was merely one half of a carefully constructed existence. The other half existed on the south side of Boston, in a modest apartment building on Warren Street, in a third-floor unit that most residents of the building had never noticed and would never visit. Inside Eleanor's apartment, the true nature of her life revealed itself. 3 rooms, modest furnishings, nothing that would draw attention from a casual visitor. But the walls told a very different story. They were covered with maps, surveillance photographs, organizational charts, and intelligence reports. Not scattered haphazardly, but arranged with methodical precision. Each piece of paper served a purpose. Each photograph was cataloged. Each connection was noted and cross-referenced. Multiple computer systems lined her small desk. High-end encryption software ran continuously. Secure communication channels remained open to selected contacts. A locked safe contained physical evidence, backup drives, and authentication credentials. Hanging on a hook behind her bathroom door was a tactical vest, carefully maintained, never dusty, always ready. And on her kitchen table, in a leather case that had been carried across countless state lines and through countless operations, lay an FBI badge, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Operations Division, one of only a handful of such credentials in existence, and certainly one of the most carefully guarded. Eleanor Davis was not just a cleaning staff member. Eleanor Davis was a federal intelligence officer of significant rank and responsibility. For the past 15 years, she had been the operational head of the FBI's Special Operations Division, a unit that officially did not exist, that conducted operations that were never recorded, that dealt with threats that conventional law enforcement could not address through conventional means. The irony of her situation was not lost on her. The woman who held one of the most powerful positions in American intelligence spent her days pushing a mop and emptying trash cans. But this irony was not accidental. It was deliberate. It was strategic. It was, in fact, the entire point of her assignment. 15 years ago, Eleanor had been a different person. She had been celebrated in certain circles, recognized for her achievements, lauded for her successes. She had been Special Agent Eleanor Davis, rising through the ranks of the Bureau, taking on increasingly complex and dangerous operations. She'd been on a trajectory that could have led to significant leadership positions within the FBI hierarchy itself. But then something had happened that changed everything. There had been an operation in Philadelphia. It had been approved at the highest levels. The intelligence had suggested it was necessary. But in the execution, something had gone wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, not in a way that could be blamed on any individual's incompetence or negligence. It was simply one of those operational outcomes that was, in retrospect, inevitable, but could not have been predicted in advance. The operation had drawn the attention of a criminal organization, not the organization that had been the target of the operation, but a different one, a more dangerous one, an organization that did not have the restraint to simply file away information and move on. An organization that operated according to a very different set of rules. The organization had identified Eleanor. They had learned her name. They had discovered her residence. They had begun what was clearly a pattern of surveillance and assessment. The FBI's response had been swift and decisive. Eleanor had been withdrawn from active field operations. Her case had been elevated to the director himself. And after weeks of careful consideration, a decision had been made. Eleanor would be protected not through conventional witness protection, which would have sequestered her away from society entirely, but through something far more creative. Eleanor would be given a new identity, not a complete disappearance, but a new life, engineered to be as visible as possible to anyone who might be looking for her, yet constructed in such a way that she would be completely unrecognizable to anyone from her previous life. She would become invisible, and in becoming invisible, she would gain access to places and information that no conventional agent could ever reach. The plan had been audacious. The execution had required months of preparation. But it had worked. Eleanor Davis had died, in a manner of speaking. In her place had come Eleanor Davis, the cleaning staff member, a woman with a meticulously constructed backstory, with references that checked out, with a social security number that was real but untraceable to her previous identity. Once she had taken on this role, once she had begun working in various office buildings, Boston's law enforcement agencies had been quietly informed of her presence. The FBI director had established a channel of communication. A handler had been assigned, and Eleanor had begun the most important work of her career. Office buildings, Eleanor had learned, were intelligence gold mines. No one pays attention to the cleaning staff. They speak openly within earshot. They leave documents on desks. They have meetings in rooms that a cleaner would naturally enter and exit. Sensitive conversations happen in the presence of someone mopping floors because that person is considered background noise, beneath notice, not worthy of attention. Eleanor had become expert at gathering intelligence in plain sight. She photographed documents with a camera concealed in her watch. She captured audio conversations through the strategic placement of recording devices in trash cans. She studied the patterns of movement in buildings, the relationships between people, the power structures and hierarchies that governed each workplace. But more than that, Eleanor had discovered something unexpected about her situation. Beyond the strategic intelligence value, beyond the operational usefulness, there was something deeply human about her existence. Her invisibility had given her a kind of freedom. No one expected anything from her beyond the completion of her cleaning duties. No one scrutinized her performance or questioned her competence in any arena beyond janitorial work. She could observe humanity in its raw, unfiltered state, seeing how people behaved when they thought no one was watching. And she had learned something profound. Most people, when they believed themselves to be unseen, revealed themselves in ways that were far more authentic than the personas they presented in public. This understanding had made her exceptional at her work. She didn't just gather intelligence, she understood people. She could read the subtle signs that indicated deception, truthfulness, anxiety, confidence, hidden ambition, or moral compromise. She could look at a person's desk, their email patterns, their conversation style, and she could construct an accurate psychological profile. This skill, combined with her official position as head of the Special Operations Division, made Eleanor one of the most valuable assets the FBI possessed. And no one knew. No one at the office building on Hanover Street had any idea who their cleaning staff member really was. To them, she was simply Eleanor. She was reliable. She was quiet. She was part of the background of their lives, as inconsequential as the paint on the walls. This was precisely how Eleanor wanted to remain, or at least that was her plan, until a new employee began working at Hanover Street. March arrived in Boston with its characteristic mood swings, days of bitter cold alternating with hints of approaching spring. The office building on Hanover Street carried on as it always did, its routines unchanged, its personnel relatively stable. Eleanor had been working there for nearly 2 years, long enough to be completely integrated into the background, long enough that people no longer even registered her presence consciously. Then, Marcus Thompson walked through the doors. Marcus was 28 years old. His father, Thomas Thompson, was a senior executive at one of Boston's most prestigious investment firms. Marcus himself worked in the office on Hanover Street in a junior management position, a role that his father's influence had undoubtedly secured for him. He was handsome in the way that wealth and good breeding typically produced: expensive haircut, designer clothes, the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no in any significant way throughout his entire life. Eleanor first became aware of Marcus on a Tuesday morning, approximately 2 weeks into his employment. He was walking through the building with the office manager, receiving what was clearly an orientation tour. Eleanor was cleaning the break room at the time. She observed his reflection in the polished metal surface of the refrigerator as he passed by. Marcus did not greet her. He did not acknowledge her. He looked through her as if she were transparent, as if her existence were not something that registered in his consciousness. Eleanor noted this and filed it away. In her experience, such behavior typically indicated one of several possibilities. Either the person had been raised in an environment where service workers were genuinely invisible to them, considered beneath the threshold of conscious acknowledgement, or they were deliberately avoiding eye contact as a display of social dominance, or they were profoundly anxious and used avoidance as a coping mechanism. In Marcus Thompson's case, Eleanor suspected it was the first option. The son of a wealthy man, raised to believe that his class and status placed him beyond the normal requirements of courtesy or common decency. For several weeks, Marcus's treatment of Eleanor, and of the cleaning staff in general, was more or less consistent with this initial impression. He would walk past her without acknowledgement. He would leave his desk in disarray, apparently not considering that someone would have to clean it. He would speak to other office workers about the trash and the people like that, without any apparent awareness that Eleanor could hear him. But then his behavior began to escalate, and Eleanor, with her years of experience reading human psychology, began to understand what was actually happening. Marcus was testing boundaries. It started subtly. A snide comment made within Eleanor's hearing, but ostensibly directed at someone else. A small gesture of deliberate disrespect, leaving a coffee cup on Eleanor's cleaning cart, for instance, instead of placing it in a trash can. These were minor provocations, but they followed a clear pattern. Marcus was gauging her responses, assessing whether she would react, calculating how far he could push before meeting resistance. Eleanor recognized the behavior because she had seen it many times before. It was the behavior of someone who had never experienced significant consequences for their actions, who had grown up in an environment where power and wealth were treated as justifications for cruelty, who had developed a fundamental belief that people of lower social status were not worthy of basic human decency. In a normal situation, Eleanor would have either endured this behavior or reported it to management. But Eleanor was not in a normal situation. She was an FBI intelligence officer operating under a deep cover identity. She could not report incidents to management without creating a record that might draw attention. She could not respond emotionally without potentially compromising her cover. She had to remain invisible. She had to continue playing the role of the quiet, unobtrusive cleaning staff member. But she was also observing Marcus, and in observing him, she began to notice other things. Marcus spoke frequently about his father's business. He referenced deals that were being closed. He made comments about certain clients and their situations. Some of these comments were made casually, in conversations with other employees. But Eleanor was in the room, cleaning, supposedly not listening. Some were made over the phone, conversations that Eleanor overheard while emptying trash cans near his desk. And some of what Eleanor heard began to raise flags in her intelligence assessment. Thomas Thompson, Marcus's father, appeared to be conducting business with individuals who were known to have organized crime connections. Not proven connections, not connections that would stand up in court, but connections that the FBI had been monitoring for some time. More than that, Thomas Thompson was supposed to be a protected government witness. Supposedly, he had testimony to provide regarding criminal activity. Supposedly, he had cut a deal with federal prosecutors to provide evidence in exchange for protective custody and certain guarantees regarding his safety and legal status. But if what Eleanor was overhearing was accurate, Thomas Thompson was not behaving like a protected witness. He was behaving like a man who was actively engaged in criminal enterprise. He was behaving like someone who had made a deal with the government and was then deliberately violating it. This realization elevated the situation from a minor workplace harassment issue to something far more significant. Eleanor needed to gather more information. She needed to determine the extent of Thomas Thompson's activities. She needed to understand the nature and depth of his criminal connections. And to do that effectively, she needed Marcus to continue talking. So, Eleanor made a decision. She would let Marcus push further. She would allow him to escalate his provocations. She would create an environment in which he felt safe and emboldened in his disrespect. Because a person who felt dominant and superior was a person who spoke freely. A person who felt no threat would reveal information that they would normally keep hidden. It was a calculated psychological manipulation, executed with the precision of someone who had spent 15 years mastering the art of human intelligence gathering. Marcus, of course, had no idea what was actually happening. He believed that he was successfully intimidating a lower-class woman who worked as a cleaner. He believed that his wealth and status gave him the right to demean and disrespect her. He believed that she was beneath him in every meaningful way. He had no idea that the woman he was attempting to humiliate was actually one of the most skilled intelligence officers in the United States, and that his every word was being analyzed, assessed, and recorded for a very specific purpose. April arrived, and Marcus's behavior had become noticeably more aggressive. He had progressed from simple disrespect to what could fairly be characterized as systematic bullying. The provocations had become more pointed, more personal, more deliberately designed to cause psychological harm. One morning, Eleanor was cleaning Marcus's work area when he approached her directly. Other employees were nearby, making this a semi-public spectacle. "Eleanor," he said, using her name in a way that was clearly meant to be demeaning, "I have to say, I genuinely admire your work ethic. It takes a special kind of person to accept such a position. To be honest, when I see people like you, people who are content with such limited circumstances, it makes me grateful for my own achievements." Eleanor continued cleaning, saying nothing. Marcus continued, emboldened by her silence. "My father says that people in positions like yours, cleaning staff, manual laborers, that sort of thing, they typically lack the intellectual capacity for anything more challenging. Is that something you've noticed about yourself? Or is it more that you lack the ambition?" A younger employee, a woman named Jennifer, looked uncomfortable. She glanced at Eleanor, clearly wanting to intervene, but Marcus held up a hand. "It's fine, Jennifer. I'm sure Eleanor understands that I'm speaking in general terms. She doesn't take offense at simple facts, does she, Eleanor?" Eleanor looked at him directly for perhaps 5 seconds. She studied his face, his expression, his posture. She was reading him the way an expert reads a text, understanding not just what was being said, but the deeper psychological dynamics at work. Then she returned to her cleaning. "Exactly," Marcus said triumphantly. "She understands her place. It's actually quite impressive the way she accepts her role without complaint. That kind of resignation must be comforting in its own way." That evening, Eleanor called her handler. They had a secure communication protocol established, a method of contact that was impossible to trace through conventional means. "I need to escalate my investigation into Thomas Thompson," Eleanor said without preamble. "I believe he's in active violation of his witness protection agreement. I'm gathering evidence through his son's workplace communications." "Understood," the handler responded. "How long do you estimate you need?" 3 weeks minimum, possibly 4. "I'm authorizing you to conduct whatever surveillance is necessary, but Eleanor, be careful. These situations can become unpredictable." Eleanor knew what the handler was really saying. "Don't take unnecessary risks. Don't let the investigation compromise your cover. Don't do anything that might expose your true nature or identity." "I'm always careful," Eleanor replied, and ended the call. The following week, Marcus pushed further still. He had apparently decided that Eleanor's lack of response to his previous comments indicated that she was fair game for even more aggressive behavior. Psychology was interesting that way. People who received no pushback tended to escalate their provocations, testing the boundaries of what they could get away with. He began making comments that were not just disrespectful, but overtly insulting. He would say things like, "The problem with people like you is that you never try to improve yourselves," or, "If you had any self-respect, you'd find something better to do with your time," or most memorably, "Do you ever look at successful people like me and feel the weight of your own failure?" Eleanor absorbed these comments silently. She did not respond with anger or defensiveness. She simply observed, documented, and continued her work. But she was also conducting her own investigation. She had begun placing small recording devices in locations around the office. She had gained access to Marcus's email, which was surprisingly easy given the basic security protocols the company employed. She was building a comprehensive file on the relationship between Marcus and his father, on the nature of Thomas Thompson's business activities, and on the criminal associations that appeared to be very much present in his operational sphere. By the 3rd week of April, Eleanor had gathered enough preliminary intelligence to provide a clearer picture. Thomas Thompson was engaged in money laundering operations. He was facilitating the movement of illicit funds through legitimate business structures. He was providing financial services to individuals with known criminal backgrounds. And most significantly, he was doing all of this while supposedly maintaining the confidentiality of his federal witness status. This was not a minor violation. This was a fundamental breach of his protective agreement, and it suggested that Thomas Thompson had either made a separate arrangement with criminal elements, promising them his cooperation in exchange for his continued protection, or he had simply decided that he was willing to take the risk of federal prosecution in order to continue his lucrative criminal activities. Either way, the situation had become critical. Eleanor sent an encrypted report to her handler with all the intelligence she had gathered. She included audio recordings of Marcus discussing his father's business. She included copies of emails. She included her assessment of the criminal networks involved. The response came back within hours. "Excellent work. We're bringing you in for a briefing. Friday, 1800 hours. Standard location. Come armed." Eleanor nodded to herself. This was the moment where the investigation transitioned from passive intelligence gathering to active intervention. The question was how to proceed in a way that did not compromise her cover or put herself in unnecessary danger. She had 3 days to prepare. Friday afternoon arrived. Eleanor went through her normal routine. She worked her shift, cleaned the building, and by 2 p.m. she had finished her responsibilities. She left the building through the service entrance and made her way to her apartment. There, she prepared herself. She showered, changed out of her work clothes, and dressed in the clothes she normally kept for her other life. She checked her service weapon, a Glock 19 that had been carefully secured in a hidden compartment behind her refrigerator. She verified her FBI credentials. She accessed her secure communication system. By 5:45 p.m., she was heading to the meeting location, a secure federal facility located in an unmarked building in downtown Boston. The briefing lasted 90 minutes. Eleanor presented her findings in detail. She walked the assembled intelligence officers and prosecutors through her investigation. She explained the evidence. She laid out the legal implications. FBI Director Daniel Richardson himself was present for the briefing. Richardson was a man in his early 60s, a veteran of the intelligence community, someone who had risen through the ranks and now oversaw some of the Bureau's most sensitive operations. When Eleanor finished her presentation, Richardson leaned back in his chair and regarded her thoughtfully. "You've done exceptional work," he said. "The question now is how we proceed. We have enough evidence to bring charges against Thomas Thompson. We can prosecute him for witness protection violations, money laundering, conspiracy. But this is delicate. We need to handle it in a way that doesn't inadvertently tip off the broader criminal network." "I recommend we use Marcus Thompson as a lever," Eleanor said. "He doesn't know anything about the criminal activities, but he can be made to believe that cooperation is in his best interest." Richardson nodded. "You're suggesting we turn him?" "I'm suggesting we convince him that the alternative to cooperation is extremely unpleasant. People like Marcus respond to self-interest. He cares about his own welfare, his own status, his own comfort. If he believes that his father's criminal activity puts his own future at risk, he'll become our most effective asset in investigating his father." "And you want to be the one to approach him?" "Yes, sir." Richardson stood and walked to a window that overlooked the Boston skyline. He was silent for a long moment. "Eleanor, you've been operating in this cover for 15 years. It's been effective. It's been crucial to several operations. But I need to know, are you prepared to end it? Because once you reveal yourself to Marcus Thompson, once he knows who you really are, your invisibility ends. You can never go back to being the cleaning staff member he's been disrespecting." Eleanor considered this. In some ways, she'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. Invisibility had its value, but it also had its cost. The psychological toll of being consistently disrespected, of being treated as beneath human notice, of being deliberately demeaned, it accumulated over time. There was a part of her that was ready to step out of the shadows. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm ready." "Approved," Richardson said. "You're cleared to proceed with contact and confrontation. We'll have surveillance in place. You'll be wired. But Eleanor, I want to emphasize, this is still your operation. You call the shots. You determine how this plays out." Eleanor left the briefing facility at 7:15 p.m. She had one more task to complete before she could finalize her confrontation with Marcus Thompson. She needed to gather one final piece of evidence. Using her federal credentials, she was able to access the employee records and personnel files at the office building on Hanover Street. She reviewed Thomas Thompson's documented business interactions with the building's clients. She identified specific transactions that matched the pattern of money laundering operations she had documented. By 9 p.m., she had everything she needed. The following Monday morning, Eleanor did something she had never done before. She called in sick to her cleaning job. It was a small act, but it was significant. She was breaking character. That afternoon, she positioned herself outside the building on Hanover Street, waiting for Marcus to leave for the day. When he emerged at approximately 5:30 p.m., Eleanor approached him. "Marcus," she said, "can we talk?" Marcus looked at her with confusion and annoyance. He clearly did not want to have any conversation with the woman he had been methodically insulting for the past month. "I don't think we have anything to talk about," he said dismissively. "We do, actually," Eleanor replied. "I need to tell you something about your father and about yourself, and I need to tell you in a way that doesn't involve other people listening." There was something in Eleanor's tone that caused Marcus to pause, something that registered as different, as authoritative, as carrying weight that his previous understanding of Eleanor had not accounted for. Fine, he said. There's a cafe 2 blocks from here. Let's go there. They walked to the cafe in silence. Marcus kept glancing at Eleanor, trying to understand what this was about. Eleanor said nothing. She was allowing the psychological tension to build, allowing Marcus's uncertainty to increase. When they were seated in a quiet corner of the cafe, Eleanor pulled out her cell phone. She accessed the video files she had compiled. She showed Marcus a recording of his father's conversation with a known organized crime figure. She showed him audio recordings of his father discussing money laundering operations. She showed him documentation of financial transactions that clearly constituted criminal activity. Marcus's face went pale. He tried to speak, but Eleanor held up a hand. "Your father," she said quietly, "is in active violation of his federal witness protection agreement. He's engaged in ongoing criminal activity. Federal prosecutors are preparing charges. You can either cooperate with us, or you can watch your father go to federal prison while your own complicity in these matters is examined." I don't understand," Marcus stammered. "Who are you? Why are you showing me this?" Eleanor reached into her jacket and withdrew her FBI credentials. She placed them on the table between them. "My name is Eleanor Davis. I work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Operations Division. For the past 15 years, I've been working in deep cover, gathering intelligence on criminal activity in this region. Much of that intelligence has been about your father." Marcus stared at the credentials. Then he looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. You work in our building. You clean." "I did," Eleanor said. "That was the cover. That was the role. But the role is finished now. And what happens next depends entirely on the choices you make." Marcus sat in stunned silence. He was processing the revelation that the woman he had systematically disrespected, the woman he had treated with contempt and disdain, was actually a federal intelligence officer. The psychological dissonance was clearly enormous for him. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked. "I want you to understand the gravity of your situation," Eleanor said. "I want you to cooperate fully with the federal investigation into your father's activities. I want you to provide testimony regarding everything you know about his business relationships and activities. And most importantly, I want you to understand that the only reason you're being offered this opportunity for cooperation, rather than being charged as an accessory to your father's crimes, is because I've recommended it." "Why would you recommend that?" Marcus asked. "After everything I said to you, Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Because," she said, "I understand human behavior. I understand that your contempt for me was not really about me. It was about your own insecurity and your desire to establish dominance over someone you perceived as powerless. It was psychology. It was not personal. But you could have just arrested me. You could have just—" "I could have," Eleanor agreed. "But that would not have served the larger objective. Your father is the real target here, and you are the key to understanding the full scope of his criminal network. That's more valuable to me than your incarceration." Marcus nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand that he had been operating at a severe disadvantage throughout this entire situation. The woman he had been attempting to humiliate had been systematically gathering intelligence on his family while playing a role that had made her virtually invisible. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now," Eleanor said, "you're going to call your father. You're going to arrange a meeting with him, and you're going to cooperate fully with federal agents in documenting that meeting. That documentation will form the basis of the charges against him." "He'll know," Marcus said. "He'll suspect something." "Then you'll have to be very convincing," Eleanor replied. 3 weeks later, Marcus Thompson was arrested. The charges included money laundering, conspiracy, and witness protection agreement violations. The criminal network that he had been associated with was disrupted. Several key figures in the organization were identified and subsequently prosecuted. Marcus Thompson, for his cooperation, received immunity from prosecution and entered into a protective custody agreement. He would need to disappear for a time to allow the criminal networks to forget about him before he could safely resume a normal life. The office building on Hanover Street was no longer Eleanor's responsibility. Her cover had been blown. She could not continue to work there as a cleaning staff member because too many people now knew who she actually was. But Eleanor's career in the FBI was far from over. In fact, her successful completion of the Marcus Thompson investigation had significantly elevated her profile within the Bureau. She was being considered for new assignments, new responsibilities. 6 months after the confrontation with Marcus Thompson, Eleanor found herself sitting in an office at Princeton University. She had been offered a position there, one that would allow her to teach a seminar on intelligence analysis, human psychology, and the ethical dimensions of intelligence work. It was not the kind of position that intelligence officers typically took. It was unusual. It was unique to Eleanor's specific set of skills and her specific circumstances. But Eleanor had made a decision. She had spent 15 years being invisible. She had accomplished significant work in that capacity. But she wanted something different now. She wanted to work with people who could see her. She wanted to teach others the skills that she had developed. She wanted to contribute to the preparation of the next generation of intelligence professionals. On her first day of teaching, Eleanor stood in front of a classroom of 54 students. They were all bright, all motivated, all selected for a specialized seminar on advanced intelligence analysis. She began her lecture simply. Today, I want to talk about one of the most underappreciated aspects of intelligence work. I want to talk about observation. Specifically, I want to talk about what happens when you observe something, and no one else knows that you're observing it. The students leaned forward, attentive. Power, Eleanor continued, is not what most people think it is. Power is not about being seen, not about commanding attention, not about dominating others physically or verbally. Real power is about understanding. Real power is about seeing what others miss, understanding what others overlook, and leveraging that understanding to create meaningful change. Eleanor paused, looking out at the class. "I'll tell you a story," she said. "A story about a woman who became invisible, and in becoming invisible, learned how to be truly powerful." And as Eleanor began to tell them the story of her investigation into the Thompson family, as she walked them through the psychological dimensions of how she had manipulated Marcus Thompson's insecurities and his arrogance, as she explained the investigative techniques that had led to the successful prosecution of a major criminal enterprise, the students began to understand something fundamental. They were learning from someone who had lived at the intersection of intelligence, psychology, ethics, and human nature. They were learning from someone who understood power not as domination, but as understanding. And Eleanor, for the first time in 15 years, was being seen for who she truly was.